Now, we're joined from New York by a great journalist, Robert Fisk, and we're going to talk about the week's events. So put your headphones on, folks. Robert, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Robert, and thank you so much for taking a call from us this early in the morning.
Don't worry.
It's been a tragic week it's a tragic era for the people of Gaza, Robert. This week, Israel appears to have made a monumental blunder. Why?
Well, I think first of all that Israel has not worked out what to do about Gaza. You see, first of all, we have to remember, why are the Palestinians in Gaza? Something the Israelis don't talk about, and oddly, we don't either. They're there because their fathers or their grandfathers were driven out of homes in that part of Palestine that became Israel in 1948. In many cases, the Palestinians in Gaza come from the town of Ashdod, where in fact the Israelis are now taking the ships of the aid ships, although that is never mentioned. It's part of the sort of hidden history of the world, or that part of the world. I think what's happened is basically that the Israeli army behaved as they usually do, which is the same way as the Arab armies do, which is like a rabble. They started shooting against people who had no guns, of course. There were sticks, undoubtedly. We saw that bit of video, although, interestingly, the Israelis have confiscated, taken, stolen, call it what you like, all the video taken by other aid workers, activists, people with sticks or anything else. But it was obviously a terrible mistake to shoot 9 people dead. And we've got to realise this wasn't just a case of shooting back in desperation. I mean, you're probably aware that the Turkish Council of Forensic Medicine, which carried out the autopsy for the Turkish Ministry of Justice in Istanbul, has discovered, for example, that there was a 60-year-old man, Turkish, shot 4 times in the temple, chest, hip and back. A 19-year-old shot 5 times from less than 45 centimetres in the face, in the back of the head, twice in the leg, once in the back. I mean, that was the kind of autopsies that came out of the Alt McGelvin Hospital on the 14 Catholics slaughtered by British paratroopers on Bloody Sunday. I mean, had we transferred this round, we'd all say, what on earth were the Israelis doing? Well, pretty much the same as the British paratroopers did, I guess. But clearly there is a difference between the Turkish, quote, activists, unquote, and, say, the Irish yesterday. That isn't really the point, though. The point is, why are the people of Gaza being starved in the way they are? The Israeli spokesman is saying that food is getting through, tons of medicine. That is not correct. UN figures show that is simply untrue. There is a vast wall around Gaza, fence around Gaza. The Egyptians keep up the siege. 1.5 million people held there, most of them, or almost all of them, unemployed, no industrial life left in Gaza. Something has to be done, but nothing is done. The Americans go along with it. Tony Blair, our meretricious peacemaker, goes along with it. And by and large, the European Union does. Of course, brave words are occasionally spoken. I was interested to see that David Cameron, the Tory Prime Minister, at least came out with a few harsh words, but basically did nothing.
And William Hague, Robert, took a notably tougher line than his predecessor.
Didn't he? I was quite surprised at that, to be honest, but he did. But at the end of the day, you see, as long as the Americans give uncritical support to Israel, there will be no change. I have to add, by the way, that Hamas, which is being turned into a kind of martyr organisation by this, it's a very cynical organisation itself. I was in Gaza a few weeks ago, and I went down one of the tunnels, for example, which bring in, food, fuel, donkeys, you name it. There's even a railway track, by the way, no doubt inspired by The Great Escape. And I discovered that Hamas is creaming off $350 million a year in taxes from the tunnels. So no wonder Hamas is not particularly keen to end the siege itself. No wonder it refused to accept the produce brought in by the Mavi Marmara. There's a very cynical side to this. Egyptian businessmen are making huge amounts of money. And the word in Cairo is that some of that is going to Israelis, which is basically used to influence the Israeli Air Force not to destroy the tunnels. It's a very dirty, cynical war in Gaza, and we should beware of becoming romantic about it.
Robert, John Waters, one of our guests in the studio, would like to ask you a question.
Yeah,
fellow Dalkey resident.
Good morning, John.
Good morning, Robert. How are you?
Kind of tired at this time of the morning. Go ahead.
I just want to ask you, Robert, from the point of view of the West and what you think our position should be. It's a very difficult situation for us to kind of evaluate morally and politically. I mean, for example, on the one hand, as you say, I mean, it's very hard to defend Israel in these situations because their responses are so extreme and so violent and vicious. On the other hand, Hamas is a fascistic organisation, and there's a kind of a tendency, I think, in left society in the West to kind of automatically take the Hamas side by default because we have such a repugnance of Israel.
I agree. Yeah.
How would you say? Like, how are we from this distance to begin to kind of sift through the moral issues in this in order to see clearly how we should lend our support to whichever side we decide to support?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't be supporting sides. We should be supporting people. We're talking about a humanitarian issue here, not a political issue. It's been politicized and will continue to be, courtesy partly of our colleagues, John. But I think the point here, you see, is that, first of all, the moral issue. No other people in the world could be treated in the way the Palestinians are, both in the West Bank, but particularly in Gaza, with such mute criticism and comment from the rest of the world. To no other people of the world could this outrageous siege of Gaza be carried out with such silence on the part of the great humanitarians of the world. So first of all, we have an issue there in that the reason, of course, why the Palestinians are not being supported in a humanitarian way is because the people who are besieging them are called Israelis, and we are all in hock to Israel for all kinds of political and moral reasons. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that siege must be lifted. And at the end of the day, I'm afraid it needs international force, whether it be diplomatic or military, to make sure that siege is undone, that the powers on both sides are de-weaponized. I mean, to ensure that Hamas can no longer fire rockets, cheap tin rubbish though they are, and that Israel can no longer shoot into Gaza. We need to have some kind of serious UN resolutions backed by the United States and the rest of the world. But I repeat, John, that is not going to happen for the reasons I explained just now.
Robert, just before I allow a couple of my other guests